to talk about some segments of the book that you have, and I've got some of the screenshots here. We're going to start with this one. This is every year I bring this up that we talked to you, Brett. It's the blue blood programs, and you do something special back in. It's usually is it January, February. I know it's early in the off season where you send a bunch of polls out there, just asking if a team's a blue blood or not. And why don't you kind of explain some of the results that we got this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of those off-season topics that never goes away, and I enjoy talking about it. But when I started to notice, it's a topic that really has no exact definition. I mean, I polled 170,000 fans, and you probably get 170,000 different definitions of what a blue blood program really means. So what I did was I put out a ton of yes/no simple questions. Is so-and-so school a blue blood in college football? And as you can see on the screen there, this is consistent with all 4 years I've done this poll, where it's the same top 8. And that's going through national titles, that's going through losing seasons, and everything in between. You see these same 8 programs emerging. And now you see Texas this year took a hit. It may be an inexact science because you do see some rival fan bases tweeting out the links. I saw a ton of Oklahoma fans. They weren't spreading the Oklahoma poll. They were spreading the Texas one, but still with some fan interference, you could see a clear top 8. Usually it's even more clear than that, with all 8 placing above 65%. But I think it's a testament to the staying power of these 8 brands in college football, that teams like Notre Dame, they haven't won a national title since the 80s. Michigan, they have the one shared title since 1950 something. So just the staying power across generations, and it's showing here again.
Yeah, we know who they shared it with. And looking at Michigan here too, they went up to 76%. They increased by 12% on a year where they went to the college football playoff. Nebraska increased by 14%. Looks like we went 3-9. It's back to your original point about Nebraska and fans just being resilient and everything. I think that's a perfect example of that too. But for the Redcasters that are going to be listening to this tomorrow and don't see it, it's Alabama, Ohio State in this order: Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Nebraska, Michigan, USC, and Texas. Those 8 fall above 50% for blue blood, and then below that were Georgia, Penn State, LSU, Florida State, Florida, Miami, Clemson, Tennessee, Auburn, and Washington. I've always appreciated seeing Clemson down there, like the 27, 30%. That's where they are usually each year. And it's the idea of what a blue blood is, Brett, that it's not about who's the flavor of the month or who's just been good for the last few years. It really is. It's built more based off of long-term tradition. And obviously for Nebraska, that's one of the reasons we continue to make that list.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of where Clemson shines is a few pages later, where I have the 5-year game grader rankings. Mm-hmm. And that shows you who's dominant nowadays. But it's a whole different category that we're talking about. I agree with you. It's something to be said about having championships and conference titles and long runs of success across generations, across different coaches. Nebraska certainly cemented into the sport's history on multiple levels. So, and they've been able to overcome a pretty rough stretch here the last 5 years and still remain as a national brand. And that's a testament, I think, mostly to the fan base too, nowadays, keeping it going. And you're seeing that pay exact dividends in this transfer portal era now. I know it's all new and stuff, but with the NIL game, the booster game, taking on even more importance around programs, I think a program like Nebraska is situated pretty well given the fan base.
Yeah, the sport's definitely going to help. Now, some of the reasons that we've struggled these last 5 years we can touch on here is another area of your book: win conversions, player development. And I have these two lists basically side by side. And win conversions, and you base your book off of the Power 5, so the 66 teams, I guess, in the Power 5 there. If you look at win conversion, Nebraska is number 65 out of that. If you look at player development, Nebraska is number 62. And specifically, I highlight, if you look at other teams that are in the Big Ten West, in win conversion, number 3 is Iowa. Number 10 is Wisconsin. Number 12 is Minnesota. If you look at player development in your list, Iowa's number 1. And this is nationally. Number 2 is Wisconsin. Number 4 is Minnesota. Number 9 is Purdue. So we're in the same division where we're having teams that are very high in win conversion and player development, and Nebraska is struggling in those areas. Brett, can you kind of explain what those two things are, win conversion and player development, are to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. This is when we talk about recruiting, I know that gets covered a lot nationally, and I think people just stop there. They see the signing day ranking and they stop there, and that's how they evaluate the teams every year. But, that's important. That's the starting point. But something's got to happen those 4 years on campus. I mean, they have to be hitting the strength and conditioning program. They got to buy in. They got to, player retention, keeping your players in-house, and then actually having schemes that work on Saturdays. So this is a way to compare the raw recruiting rankings on signing day to actual outputs. NFL draft output in terms of picks, win conversion looks at actual wins on the field. So it's kind of a comparative thing. So yeah, it's kind of the schools you'd expect that are at the top of that. Iowa, they don't usually recruit in the top 40 or much less the top 25, but they're grinding out wins and they're putting a ton of players into the pros. Same with Wisconsin. It's kind of intuitive. You can rattle off some in your head. And on the other side, you can rattle off some that have, blown some of those high signing classes that they continue to sign, and it's just not showing up on the field. I mean, Florida State is notorious for this. Texas recently, the LA schools, they recruit high and don't do anything with it. And sadly, on this show, Nebraska appears on both lists. And
Sure.
we can talk about specific reasons why. I mean, coaching changes don't help. Usually when you see a coaching change, you see an exodus of players. And so a lot of those blue chippers that you had signed are elsewhere now, contributing or earning, all conference status elsewhere. I saw a tweet a while back. This is maybe a couple cycles ago from one of the Nebraska media who went right through a whole recruiting class. So it was maybe the 17 or 18 class, and almost every single one of those guys was no longer in Lincoln. And that's just a microcosm of, you got to sign them, but you got to retain them. And Nebraska has struggled with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the last one that I want to touch on that's from the magazine is your game grader. And this has always intrigued me. And this is one that has Nebraska a little bit higher. We were 34th last year. And I guess what's kind of always intrigued me about it is that it puts metrics kind of behind a game. When you look at it's not always just what the final score is. And everyone knows Nebraska's problems last year. I mean, how historically strange and on historic levels they were. The only program ever in college football history to have 9 losses by single digits, to have 8 losses by 1 score or less, to have a positive point differential over the course of a season, the biggest point differential of any team ever, and that didn't go on to win more than 25% of their games ever. And there's only been like 4 teams in college football history, at least in the poll era, that's done that. So there's some historical things that they did. They scored 239 points in Big Ten play and gave up 239 points, but went 1-8. So there's all these weird historical things. And these things where Husker fans can look at it and go, gosh, I know we were better than 3-9. Look how close we played Ohio State and Michigan, who ended up in the playoffs and all that. And yet, the game grader kind of helps put some kind of respect towards that. When you see that we're listed here, I think it's 34th. What does the game grader do? And how did 2021 come out for Nebraska in your game grader?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with game grader, I guess I'll start with saying that I think it's important to have balance between the numbers and actually watching the games and understanding the schemes and talking to head coaches, talking to coordinators. So I try and put it all in there in my analysis. But on the analytics side, I needed a formula to really, to really paint the picture of what happened on that Saturday. I have 4 screens on every Saturday for 14 hours. I'm watching everything I can. And then on Sunday, watching some condensed games to catch up to. But still, when you see a score come across the ticker, you don't really know exactly what happened that day. I mean, you could see Nebraska 21 and Iowa 27 or whatever the final was, and not really know what happened that day. So what Game Grader does, it digs deeper than just the box score, deeper than just the final score. It throws in a lot of my analytics, my metrics, yards per play differential. What else? We got explosive plays in there, all kinds of stuff. And then what it does, eventually it adjusts it to opponent strength too, because beating Akron 55-0 is a lot different than beating Wisconsin 55-0. So basically it's a way to statistically break down a season and adjust for opponent strength and get a number on these teams. It's also important for me to do because I'm the only guy here. I'm doing all 66 Power 5 teams. I'm going across division, across conference, trying to compare them all. So it kind of, it's a way to really look across leagues and get numbers on teams. So yeah, Nebraska, I put this at the bottom of that page. I had to update who the example team was. Nebraska is now the example for the game grader page, just because of how much of a statistical outlier this year was. You already touched on all the records. I don't have to rehash that, but pretty incredible that a 3-9 team can still finish right at average on the Power 5 level. And I think also game grader, it always shocks me. The numbers kind of match up with what I see. I mean, when I watch Nebraska, I think they're a lot better than that 3-9 team. And I think that they are about average, if not higher, when you look across the Power 5 landscape. So it's a way to, it's really helpful, predictive, forward looking.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob, before we get into doing the segments that we want to get into with the football, do we have anything right now? I see a bunch of comments. I don't know if any of them are questions or.
I mean, yeah, there are a few questions, but like a couple of them, like Jim in Minnesota. I want to get to that later when we're talking about Nebraska, right? Somebody wanted to know if there were some questions about like the running back room and all that, and I'm not sure if that's stuff that we might touch on with Brett, because we're maybe when we get to Nebraska we can touch on some of that too, because we're looking more at like the conferences and just kind of the overall predictions on the season there. Somebody said, nationally speaking, is Texas back this year? Which I of course responded, said Texas is back every year, horns down. But what about that, Brett? How let's talk a little bit of like the Big 12/SEC. How is Texas?
No, I don't want to get into that yet.
Oh, you don't want to get into that yet?
Not
okay,
yet.
good.
We're going to do national stuff. I just if you had a specific question or not, but
Rob, Texas and Nebraska, they seem to win the offseason national championship every year.
Every single year. Go Big Red, baby.
The Kool-Aid is flowing in Lincoln, and then Texas is back. The horns are up.
What do they have there? The smoking the brisket or something?
They do horns up and then complaining about horns down. That's their whole. That's their
okay. Because I'm fully on the Kool-Aid train. That's
yeah, smoking the brisket and drinking the Kool-Aid, and we're both blue bloods. So there you go.